convene the, 142nd meeting of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission at the Convention Center on January 8th. Is this working right? The first order of business, as usual, is the approval of minutes. Commissioner McHugh.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the minutes are in the meeting material packet, the minutes, that is, of the December 18, 2014 meeting. And I would move their approval as they appear there, with the usual reservation of the power to change and correct typopographical and other mechanical errors.
Second?
Yes, second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Next item is administration, Executive Director Day.
Good morning, Chairman Crosby, members of the commission.
Morning. Good morning.
Glad to see everybody is still warm and
Safe
no
and sound.
frostbite.
Right.
From my perspective, just had a few things I'd like to talk about from the administrative support or report. One of those is of course to acknowledge that at this point our address has changed to 101 Federal Street, 23rd floor, Boston. Other than the move itself, and I think John happens to be sitting here, Glennon, and so I think one thing we've kind of noticed at the office that actually all the IT resources are working and in place when we were there, which I knew took some extra effort from John's team to get that taken care of, and so we definitely appreciate it.
Practice.
You know that.
Thank you. Practice for doing it again in 8 or 9 months.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big job, though, and to make that work as seamlessly as it did is really praiseworthy. So
we had some- we had
thank
some-
you and your team for
Thank
doing
you.
that
We had
so
some good
smoothly.
partners. Dan McDonald, Mass IT helped us out. We had some vendors helped us out. It really is pretty impressive to leave a box in your computer and your phone and come back into your new space and have everything working. I think
Right.
we did
Right.
good work. So thank you for that.
Really was very good.
Both you and your team and Janice and her team,
Absolutely.
every which way, the
The
whole,
logistics were
the
great.
the process
Very
worked
good.
great. Yeah. Okay.
With that, I've got a few updates for the commission. I wanted you to know that our horse racing staff and our human resources are preparing to open recruitment for seasonal positions at the Plain Ridge track. This season will be from April 1 to about November 30th, so it'll be about 4 weeks longer. We should be able to post the positions ranging from judges, positions that range from judges to testing assistants by next week. Our horse racing staff, gaming licensing, and our Massachusetts State Police work together to fingerprint and process license applications for 56 Plain Ridge and Raynham applicants as well. We plan to provide the same service to Suffolk. The troopers actually went down and printed on site, which was very helpful. Of course, this is the first year that racing applicants were required to fingerprint. We are also, of course, processing the New England Horsemen Benevolent Protective Association application to transfer their license and simulcast. And we are working to complete proposed revisions to CMR 250, Section 2, 3, and 4. Our goal here is to provide an opportunity for us to make those proposed changes, review them with the stakeholders, and then bring them to the commission as we get past that point. In our recruitment activities, I wanted to share a few updates with the commission. We have identified an experienced candidate for our gaming agent supervisor position at the slot parlor. We will shortly begin recruiting as well for the gaming agents. We'll have to staff the facility. We filled our paralegal position. Position will start later this month. We've selected a candidate to fill the administrative assistant finance HR position. We've engaged a search at this point for a revenue accountant and administrative assistant for IT and the chief of staff. And we've engaged a search with local colleges for an intern for workforce supplier and diversity development. As John will mention, we're continuing to search for a gaming lab manager. Anticipate we have recently a few candidates that we'll be speaking to as we move through that process. We've also been recruiting for 2 licensing support staff, and we are reviewing about 85 applications for those 2 positions. In addition, just kind of an update as we ended the year, the Division of Licensing has reviewed and processed about 318 applicants registered or subcontractors at this point. And those applications involve about $198,000. The fees are either collected or to be collected. They consist of a number of combinations of different type of applicants and registrants, but there are about 10 primary gaming vendors in that group, about 113 supporting qualifiers, 6 gaming vendor secondary applications, and about 36 qualifiers associated with those, and about 80 non-gaming vendors or registrants. They're in that group. In addition, our licensing management system is in soft launch within the agency, and we are anticipating beginning to load actual data in that system by early next week. We held recently a kickoff meeting to introduce and coordinate our project monitors and staff and with the MGM representatives to identify the regulatory process and expectations from the Commission's oversight of the project and their commitments. We've also began a review of each director's and division's plans needed to ensure the Commission is prepared to effectively regulate when the slot parlor is ready to open. We are also nearing the completion of a significant update and reorganization of the Commission's website as well. A number of activities going on in the agency at this point, and that gets me through the administrative report unless I have any questions.
No, thank you.
All right. With that, Mr. Chairman, it brings us to item B, the discussion about the central management system. We are back today in our discussion regarding the central management system for monitoring slot activity. We were using the time in between the last meeting to see if we could gather information about the feasibility of a joint effort with New Jersey and to complete some additional preparation to try to answer any follow-up questions you might have today. Derek and John and with their team are here today to proceed ahead with that discussion, and I'll turn it over to Derek and Mr. Lennon here so they can move forward.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Morning.
Today I'm joined once again by Matt Cedar from GTEC, Jackie Mancini from GTEC. We have John Glennon, our CIO. We have Bruce Band, our Deputy Director of Gaming Agents, and Vanessa Orso, one of our financial investigators. Part of the key team that's been reporting to you since April on this topic. Back in December, I think it was the 18th or 19th, we presented to you and you asked us to come back in 2 weeks with a few follow-up items. One was the progress of how we're doing with our conversations with New Jersey on a possible alternative, which John will talk about in a few minutes. And the second one was about the straight staffing piece of the return on investment that we had presented back on the 18th. So what happens when you phase it in? Are there some other alternatives? So I'll let John talk first about the New Jersey process, and then we'll talk about the staffing piece, and if you have any questions. Then we have some public comments that came in from both Penn National and MGM came in last night. They're in your packet if you'd like to address any of those questions. I think the MGM representatives may want to come up and discuss some of the items with you or field any questions you have about their written material.
So, on a recent trip to New Jersey, our team, including 2 commissioners and a group of people looking at internal controls and opening, had the opportunity to visit the New Jersey Department of Gaming Enforcement Technology Services Bureau lab. And what they're currently doing with technology is an innovative approach to monitoring iGaming, which is essentially there are 15 providers of internet gaming services, and New Jersey is monitoring them using some innovative technology. And the question was raised whether or not that's something that could be scaled out and built out for brick and mortar, similar to the application that we are looking at buying, the solution we're looking at buying from GTEC. So we had a number of conversations with Eric Weiss and members of his technical team, and what we've agreed is to continue to look at that alternative. I think there's a feasibility there. I'm just concerned about the timeline, the cost, and getting in the software development business. But that having been said, the benefit would be a very low-cost model, something that could be shared with regulators across the country, and it may very well be able to provide us the information that we need to regulate. I think those are, those are some of the questions that need to be answered. So we've agreed to work with them. I think this is in its nascent stages. There's really nothing on paper. It's a discussion. But they are engaging with the Gaming Standards Association and other people in the world of technology to see whether this is something that could be built out. So I think Massachusetts is interested in that effort, and we're going to work with them. I think the timing of that and the amount of effort we put in, I think is going to be determined by the commission.
Are there other jurisdictions? Are they talking to other jurisdictions, or is anybody else?
I think the idea came about when their system was demoed for our team, and our team said, well, we're doing this for brick and mortar. Is this something that you think is scalable and transferable from server to server validation to validation of individual electronic gaming devices? And I think that that's what Eric and his team are going to look at, along with our cooperation and collaboration.
Okay, so this started with us. It's not something other jurisdictions
Correct.
are kicking around.
Yeah.
But it's functioning, it's operational in the iGaming arena. The question is, could this be operational?
So
with
I
the
would say
bricks and mortar?
operational is a broad term in terms of feature and functionality, okay? I think they do some validation server to server. I think the amount of features and functions and the ability and capabilities of the intelligence system are significantly more than the type of validations they're currently doing with the data. It's really, it's not asset management, and again, it's not an apples to apples comparison, so I really don't want to say they're doing what we would be doing with the intelligence system. It's not purely apples to apples, Commissioner.
So it is not an asset management tool, because it's in a different universe, right?
It is not.
Right. And it does not, does it capture, in terms of data, all the data that we would capture through a CMS?
No, it authenticates that the games running on the iGaming servers, that are the providers, are authorized by New Jersey to operate. And I believe it also collects meter data, so to speak, from the sessions, the gaming sessions as well. So the financial piece. But there is no asset.
No, right.
There isn't a fixed asset. You're talking
Right.
about mobile gaming.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And the meter data that it captures, what do you mean by that? Can you?
No. So I'm still kind of fuzzy on exactly what they're doing with the technology, but I believe transactionally there's dollars associated with the sessions that are being monitored. I believe they also collect that information. Derek, is that accurate?
Yes, we didn't get into a technical discussion, but basically what they're doing is verifying the revenue data that's being presented to them manually through the network.
By
Yeah.
the operators?
Correct,
Okay,
by the
So it's
15 providers.
okay, so it's an independent verification of the financial data
Correct.
that the operators are giving them.
Correct.
And the validation of the signatures of the software
Plus
running.
the validation of the signatures of the software. So we don't know, and they're not prepared to tell you now, based on their knowledge, whether it can also function as an asset management system.
I would say that's correct.
Okay.
So how do you leave it? I mean, you alluded to this in your introductory remarks. Help me understand time frame to
So-
explore further feasibility or the
Eric and his
functionality
team have people from the Gaming Standards Association coming in to talk about the protocols in addition to SAS. And, I think they're still looking at the architecture. What would be the optimal architecture in order to implement this? They're talking about possibly requiring agents on individual gaming devices that would be put there on the part of regulators to collect the data, because essentially that's the way they're doing it now. They have an agent running on each of the servers at these iGaming providers that is collecting and transmitting the data. So I think the technical solve, if you will, or how the approach is going to be done with brick and mortar has not been worked out. I think there's a conversation about what are the mechanics. We know that slot machines, electronic gaming devices, give out data. I think it's the question of how do we collect that data. The other question, I think, is the interoperability, the ability of the system to affect the machine. I think the asset management piece is a significantly more complex component of what we were looking to buy than, I mean, I don't think that's been considered at this point in the Jersey model, but I think they will consider it.
Yeah, that assumes that we're looking to mirror what GTEC provides, but that may not be the goal, right?
From the standpoint of the efficiencies of the GTEC, I think the asset management piece was one of the savings, the productivity and efficiency pieces that we saw as being an advantage. So I think we would look to have that capability in whatever, if we were looking for an alternative.
But it doesn't have to be a technical or a technological capability, right? Everybody that doesn't have a CMS can do that manually.
Yes, you certainly can do things manually.
Okay.
Thank you, John. So now we'll go over the return on investment. It's three slides. It's a summary slide, and then the meat of the information's on the second and third slides. The first one has to do with payroll. Could you just drop it down one slide? And I want to thank Vanessa for pulling this all together. Once again, I had sat down, did a power brainstorming session with her, and then she made it look nice. And she verified the numbers. And Enrique has had a chance to actually review this with us. So I'll walk through what we did. One of the requests was you did a flatline analysis of staffing over 10 years. What does it look like if you ramp it up for 1,250 facilities? And then what does it look like based on the staffing patterns we had identified when in MGM, when and potentially a fourth facility comes online? So the assumptions here are 4 facilities, 10,000 gaming devices, and the start dates that have been presented to us. So for the first 2 years, if you take a look in the analysis, we really end up not losing money, but the return on investment is negative because we only have 1 facility up and running. Our staffing pattern would be only 16 gaming agents, 2 auditors, and 2 additional auditors and 2 additional IT staff. That's the same in the second year. First year is prorated for just the last quarter of the year because Penn is scheduled to come online for January, sometime in June, and we would start hiring our staff. The auditors we'd start right now, as Rick had told you, and with the gaming agents, it'd be with all the other gaming agents in March as our anticipated come-on date. But once you start adding in other facilities, the MGM, the Wynn, that's when we start to tip the scales and the return on investment comes positive. Now, we did some stress tests to this. There's a second slide if you go down to the next one. That actually takes a look at the IT costs that are associated with this. So when we first came into this discussion, you have the base cost of the system, which is $187,000 a month, prorated for the first year, and then you have the startup fees for each one of the facilities, and then you have what we would project for costs to build databases in a non-central management environment, which would take in all of the manual process of meter reads, aggregate them at a central level so that we can compare across facilities, as well as all the asset information that John was talking about that would be updated on a weekly or monthly basis to let us know where each device is sitting on the floor and what platform it's running on and what games are being played on it, so that we can make sure it's within the approved gameplay. When you add those two pieces together, the IT piece with the staffing piece, over a 10-year period, I think we come out to about a positive $2 to $3 million return on investment just on staffing. Doesn't include any of the additional revenue we projected could come into play. But then we sat down and we did a stress test on it. What happens if one of those facilities does not come online? So say we won't say, the third facility in the chart doesn't come online. All of a sudden, our return on investment turned into a negative $500,000. So the system would cost you about $50,000 a year over that if you averaged it out, over that 10-year period. But once again, you look at, without adding the additional revenue back in, and what you're looking at are 100% audit, 100% verification of assets versus 10% audit, 10% verification of assets. So is the system worth it at that? And I think most people would argue it is. Now we did a further stress test. What happens if two facilities don't come online? So now your basic EGD is only 4,000 to 5,000 units, depending on whether slot parlor would be allowed to do more. But you're at 4,000 to 5,000 units compared to 10,000. All of a sudden, the return on investment is a negative $3 million. So there's a $5 million swing within the 10,000 to 5,000, 4,000 EGDs once you stress test it. So we didn't want to give just the rosiest. We didn't want to give the worst case scenario. Somewhere in between there lies the reality. Now, I know there were some questions about could we restructure the financing of this? And I mean, GTEC's here. We can't ask those questions specifically or get specific details unless we select them as a vendor under state procurement rules and start the negotiation process. But I think there's an indication that they'd be willing to discuss options with us as long as it doesn't hurt the bottom line of the contract. They quoted a price. It was a very competitive price. It was, it was $7 to $10 million cheaper than the next one. I don't want to give the exacts, but it was $7 to $10 million cheaper than the, less expensive than the next best price quoted after the best and final offers. So, I think to ask them to go lower on the base price would just really go outside of the market value. But
Derek, remind me, this version that made it into the packet
we did not do net present value. You're correct.
That wasn't the question.
I'm
That was actually my second or third question. Does not include the refresher cost. Correct. There's a refresher cost that's part of their proposal on year 5, and that's not reflected in this version, correct?
Correct. That would be a $3 million increase at year 5, but it's year 5 of the facilities. So depending on when the facilities came online, which is I think why we decided not to put it in when we had that discussion about putting this forward. So at what point do you put it in? At what point are the facilities going to come online if we're going to contemplate that discussion?
So there's a refresher per facility?
No, it's overall, but the software, so the total cost of the refresher is $3.5 million or $3 million.
Okay.
But when it happens is 5 years from the implementation at that facility. So Penn would get it year 5, Wynn would get it MGM and Wynn would technically get it year 7 or 8 of the contract if we did it right from the very beginning, because they're coming online later.
So Penn would get the prorated amount of $3 or so million, or all 3? That's the piece.
We could discuss that during
Anyway,
the negotiation period.
Okay.
But it's a total of 3, it's a
$3
total
million,
of 3,
yeah, total
3
$3
plus
million, yeah.
whenever it hits.
Whenever it hits. That's a quoted price.
But on your assumption, on either your 3 or 4, well, any of your assumptions, it would still hit sometime during the 10 years, right?
Well, it depends depends on how many facilities we're upgrading or whether we even decide to upgrade at that point. Is
So
it
it's
feasible?
3 million if you upgrade
Yeah.
4 facilities. It's less if you upgrade 1 facility, or 2 or 3?
Well, I haven't got into those details because I can't talk specifics
Oh,
until
okay.
we select them as a vendor.
Well, can I ask G-Tech, what, is that refresher an absolute one-time cost, no matter how many facilities are involved?
First of all, let me say, good morning, Happy
Good
New
morning.
Year.
Good morning.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Commissioners, thank you for having me back. Per the RFR, the refresher costs were hardware and software costs for the central system and the equipment at each facility. So there is some facility-specific cost in there, but there's also a central system cost which would be independent of any of the facilities themselves.
So there's some flexibility in the 3 million, but we don't know exactly how much.
Correct, it would depend on what you wanted to do, when you wanted to do the upgrade, what you wanted to do with it from a central system standpoint and from a facility standpoint.
Derek, why did you, excuse me, were you finished?
No, go ahead.
Why did you use 10 years as opposed to 5 or 15, or, the license is 15, but these presumably their casinos are going to be there for 50 years or 100 years, who knows?
So we went with 10 years with an option to renew of 5 to basically go out the license of a casino contract. So the total value of the total length of the contract is 15 years. And the reason for going with 10 years is we thought 5 years isn't really valuable, especially with the timeline we had. We figured 10 years would give us a good time frame to evaluate the partnership. And if we chose not to extend it, we could cancel it out at that point. If we chose to extend it, we could go through the life of a license. That was our thinking. If it's the
Okay.
wrong,
Well, because it seems, in one sense, it makes all the, but we're sitting in today, but this is going to be a very, very long-term proposition, as best anybody knows. Even when the casino licenses are up, there's no expectation that the casinos are going to go away. That the
No.
operating assumption is that it'll
You would renew the
be
procurement.
renewed in some way, fashion, or other. So in each of your models, year 10, what is the number? I guess at year 10 in your fourth facility scenario, there
Could you go
it's
back to the
clearly
summary
you're saving significant money in year 10, right?
correct.
And then in your 3 scenario, what does year 10 look like?
In the third scenario, we're $5
In the
million.
three facility scenario
Oh, we're 500,000 negative return on investment.
for the 10 years.
For the
But
10
what
years.
does year 10 look like itself?
Oh, I don't have that generated.
Is it still- is
It's
it-
still a positive.
It's positive.
Because you lose you lose
So
the
it's
significant
so-
amount of money in the first 3 years.
Because I think I'm not quite sure which way this cuts, but this isn't a 10-year deal we're talking about. This is a multi-year
Yeah.
Well,
proposition.
however, if we were doing a return on investment, which was the question that you anticipated, depending on the discount rate, the analysis today for year 11 and henceforth really loses, the punch, if you will, because it's all about how much we're spending up front for the benefits that come in the future. So I think 10 years is just fine for
Well,
financial
Well, I agree.
calculations.
I just-
If we were doing a net present value, which we haven't done here.
Right. I understand that, but I just think it's worth remembering that this isn't over in year 10. Wherever we're at year 10, it's going to keep on going for a long period of time.
Right, and there could be all kinds of new
Yeah,
technologies
but who
on
knows?
year 11.
Who knows what the future holds? That's
Right.
right. That's right. I agree.
that
Okay, all right.
Maybe even GTEC.
And I'm sure
would be
GTEC would
providing.
tell you there'll be new technologies
Yeah,
as they've
right.
advanced over the
Right, okay, I agree with that.
time period.
Well, My reaction, as I've told you before this, Derek and Rick, having had the chance to discuss with John, is this notion of the upfront cost, that the business case overall, as I see it, including not just the monitoring, but the asset management piece, in my view, makes a lot of sense if the assumptions come to fruition, if we are under the rubric of operating 10,000 machines or thereabouts. And then there's a diminishing aspect on the business case if we're, of course, only operating 1,250 machines, which is what we have in store with quite a bit of certainty. So I have a general feeling that it's important to think about all these things as we set up the regulatory structure, which you've done. And you've done a great job in researching multiple options. But I'm still a little bit uncomfortable with the notion that, and this is just the way, the statute was conceived, right? There's these slots parlor that comes in for which we need to be ready, but the big piece that comes in is really 2.5 years or more away. So I'm wondering, and this is ultimately perhaps a question for GTEC and not one that's easy to answer in the public meeting, but perhaps more the subject of negotiations. But I'm wondering if we could put off the decision on the implementation on the number of machines, because we will have a lot more certainty very soon, as soon as this year, for example, of what time frame the next wave, the big wave of machines is going to come in. That's my general thought.
I didn't know where you were going. You said, so you're saying, can we not do this for
Could we put
another
off?
year?
Yeah, could we put off this decision, A, and try to capitalize on the procurement that we've already conducted, either by asking GTEC to hold off their pricing, refresh their pricing at a later time, without having to do another procurement.
And do a manual system in the interim you're talking about?
Yes, in preparation for the slot parlor opening,
Okay.
So I
or a
did,
version of that.
so I just want to write down as each commissioner what their ideas are, have them down. So Enrique, what you're asking is, can we ask GTEC to hold their pricing for a certain amount of time?
That's what.
And then you want to know if they would refresh their pricing. So I did do some research into that second item. Because of the way we wrote the RFR, to capitalize on this process, we can't ask them to refresh. We've already done a best and final offer. We've already presented what their best and final offer is. To do that, when there was sealed pricing bids, would give the second or third person who submitted bids a advantage that the other competitors didn't have or GTEC didn't have. So they came in with the lowest bid, they came in with the lowest best and final offer. So I don't think we could ask them to come back with another pricing if we wanted to capitalize on this procurement. We can always ask them to hold pricing. There was nothing within our RFR of how long it's mandatory to hold pricing. I think by state procurement rules, they're only required for either 30 or 45 days. They're only required to hold it, which I think we probably passed that time period at this juncture. But we can always go back and ask them to hold it if that's what the commission decided.
So
They're not obligated to.
So if we wanted to do what Commissioner Zuniga suggested we do, we'd have to have another procurement.
If he wants other pricing, yes. If he wants,
If I want what?
if you want new pricing, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Which could go both ways, I suppose, right? The new pricing could be more, could be less. Who knows?
It could cut both ways, but I just want to remind you that this bid, the difference in bids that came in, so it could cut both ways.
Well, are we going to give an opportunity to talk about the
Yeah,
MGM
for sure.
letter?
Yeah, but. it's
Well,
not- it's not-
I have a couple more questions here. Have we run to shift gears a little bit, have we run to ground and are we satisfied about the separation between the monitoring project and the manufacturing, once these two companies are combined? We have, just so that the context is clear, GTEC and IGT are in the process of joining together. One sells the monitoring stuff that we're talking about today. The other manufactures the games that are going to be monitored, potentially, in some state, IGT being one of the big game manufacturers. So have we satisfied ourselves that there is an impermeable firewall between the two activities?
So we've run that question through our legal department during the procurement process, and we posted the answer to that there doesn't appear to be a conflict. One of our licensees brought up this issue, and through conversations with them, GTEC is currently being investigated by the IEB to become a gaming primary vendor. So if there are specific areas, we could always take a deeper look into that. But our legal department has answered that question, and I think GTEC can talk a little bit too. They've been asked to answer this question in other jurisdictions as well.
We've been asked this question in a number of jurisdictions. One that I'm personally familiar with is Pennsylvania. I testified at the December 10th meeting, I think it was, of the Pennsylvania Gaming Board, where my portion of the testimony was involving the central system. And the gaming board approved the ability for GTEC to continue to operate the central system and IGT to continue to sell slot machines in the state of Pennsylvania after the transaction is complete. I don't believe the minutes of that meeting have been posted. I know the presentation that we presented at that meeting is available on the Pennsylvania Gaming Board's website, but I expect the minutes from the meeting will be there soon. And Pennsylvania did an investigation. They didn't find any issues themselves. And also, I believe they stated that none of the operators in Pennsylvania had expressed a concern about it as well. But those minutes, once they post them, will be publicly available.
Okay, thank you. Were you going to follow up on that?
Yes.
Okay. Then I have another question after that on a different subject.
In their letter, and I know we'll hear from them, I hope, but on this very topic, MGM raises the question of, that question of the IGT, GTEC topic in conjunction with some of our regulations that grandfather certain system for the slots parlor, but not for the other operators, given the time frame, as one that gives rise to, or it increases the notion of this conflict of interest, if you will. And it's something that I don't quite understand. Could some of you speak to that, or will we let MGM speak to that?
We would want MGM to talk to that, because our conversation with them on the phone was a little different than how the letter came in.
Okay.
The conversation on the phone was more of a larger selection that Pennsylvania will have of types of machines, because they'll be allowed to bring in SAS-based as well as G2S. So
Pennsylvania or Penn?
In Penn, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Penn would be able to have of SAS-based versus G2S, as opposed, and they would only be able to bring in G2S. That was more the discussion there, was a competitive edge.
Yeah, not a conflict of interest, but a competitive
Yeah.
disadvantage.
Yeah.
One that they also highlighted with Connecticut, for example, not just Penn in this
Correct.
case.
That wasn't so much around the conflict. The conflict was around what Matt was discussing, having central monitoring system monitoring over the games that their same company owns.
Right, right.
And investigating that firewall between the two divisions to make sure it's a clear separation. Which, like I said, if there's specifics, I'm sure we could ask our team to take a look into what Pennsylvania did, our IAB.
So I want to give some historical perspective. When we promulgated our regulations, the original drafts required that all electronic gaming devices as of a certain date have G2S or system-to-system protocols, and that was a 2-year period, and Penn asked that they be allowed to put in SAS-based machines, and those that are installed can be grandfathered. It was our decision to accept that because we would still be getting a set of data from those machines. It wouldn't be the rich data protocols of G2S, but that was a concession because Penn is opening 2 years earlier, and manufacturers have not been quick to adopt this. It's a standard that has been in the works since 2006. I know I've said that multiple times. So we amended the regulations to grandfather SAS-based machines for those 1,250 devices, and we require the commercials, Win and MGM, to have G2S-based machines effective January 1st, 2017. So the conversation yesterday was around the competitive advantage of being able to put a SAS-based machine in and have availability of a broader inventory, because truly, of all the manufacturers, really only the top 5 or maybe in the top 10 are beginning to adopting the G2S standard. I think our reasoning is more data, a richer data set, and that's the way the regulations ended up. I think this was a surprise during the conversation yesterday, and I think that was the reason that they raised it in the letter. Right?
Well, why isn't that a separate conversation from the conversation about whether we ought to have a CMS?
I believe it is. I mean,
And why, okay, and if it is a separate conversation, and if it is so, that manufacturers are slow to adopt the the G2S system, and if as a consequence, our regulation means that there won't be as rich an array of games potentially on the gaming floor by 2017. Why isn't that a topic we need to take up and rethink in a context that is separate from the CMS conversation? In other words, a possible outcome of that conversation is either to allow both forever, or push back the effective date of the G2S requirement, or leave it the same. But however you come out, it doesn't affect the primary question.
Commissioner McHugh, we actually have not a long list, but a few other slot machine-related new regulations and changes to make coming forward. And so, as you said, that appears to be the optimal time to do that at that point. And we can take a look at what MGM has to say in their letter more detailed, and then we can make a decision on whether that needs to move forward. But that would be the forum I think you're talking about for that kind of discussion.
Okay. Then, and we haven't heard from them yet, but that gets me to the last paragraph of MGM's letter. Does that kind of a conversation sooner rather than later that they're talking about in that last paragraph blend in with what you're talking about? And is that a conversation that should occur before we make a final decision on the CMS and allied questions? I know another postponement is not what people are looking for. I understand that. But we are talking about a 10-year investment with some, 10-year plan with some significant consequences, both in terms of dollars and in other terms.
Commissioner McHugh, and that's their suggestion to sort of bring together a group.
Get everybody together and
Get
talk
everybody
through some of
together,
these
discuss
things. Including the one we were just talking about. And I'm not talking about a long postponement. if we're going to do that, we've got to make a decision so the pen can be ready to go on schedule, right? Everybody's committed to that. And it's my understanding that you can, but it's not, it's highly undesirable to start off with a manual system and say, we'll catch up later after these machines are installed and up and running. That's not good. We ought to decide it one way or the other before they open. So that, it looks to me, is a hard deadline, and we've got to adjust all of our decision-making to enable that to happen. So any postponement to have the kind of discussion that's talked about in the last paragraph, it seems to me, has to take place very
Well,
soon.
I do want to say that, after the last meeting, I reached out to all three of our licensees, and we did have discussions with all three of them. Unfortunately, the MGM one was yesterday afternoon, so, really little time to respond to their letter, and I think in the spirit of collaboration, I agree with you. I think it's a conversation that this needs to be the right decision for all concerned. So I think if we need additional time to have a collaborative conversation and readdress some of these issues, then maybe that's what we should do.
Now,
Wait a minute, Derek.
yeah. Now, based on my understanding of this central management system, or central monitoring system we're looking at, it can handle SaaS-based gaming, it can handle downloadable gaming, and it can also handle G2S gaming. So whether the platform can handle the different machines or different options you would put in, it's covered in the RFR. It's a requirement of the RFR. So if you wanted to change up the variety and you wanted to give the same competitive basis to all of the jurisdictions, it can handle it. Would there maybe be an additional cost that we'd have to negotiate with GTEC because we didn't build in a cost for interface boards, which is with the SaaS-based, you need 2 feeds coming out of the machine. We didn't build in that cost for anything but the pen facility because we were assuming we wouldn't need that. But the system can handle it. GTEC can answer this question if you need to, but that's what our RFR required. You have to be able to handle all of these options.
And maybe part of that conversation would be who bears the cost for the older stuff.
Correct.
But how undesirable is this notion of reversing, just with the slots parlor, a decision of going with manual and then backfilling or retrofitting, if you will, central monitoring system? Because that's where where I think I want to explore, putting up the decision that gives certainty and as to the timing on the main operations, 6,000 plus machines, and in the meantime deal with the slots parlor. By the put off that I'm talking about, effectively would have to deal with the slots parlor and retrofit a central monitoring system if we put off that decision enough. How undesirable, as you were just characterizing it, Commissioner, is that option?
I would ask, IEB, because I think the greatest impact on starting up operations or operationalizing oversight of our regulations in a manual fashion as opposed to using systems is going to be a significant challenge because you're going to be training one way and then maybe having to shift the course. So Bruce, can you speak to that?
I think it's a disadvantage starting up in the manual and switching over. The systems, the amount of staff it takes, even the learning curve to how to use the system and everything, it's just not desirable to make people learn 2 different ways of doing it. Even our training gets extended quite a bit to learn how to do these slot inspections and sealing the chips and the like with that.
And the learning curve for the CMS under that scenario, under the delay scenario, we'll call it, would have to take place in an operational facility rather than before a facility started its operations.
Correct.
And it also would, to do that, would deprive us of the sort of testing on a small scale that we are in other ways looking to our slots parlor to provide us with. And they've been very generous in accepting that role thus far,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Let me ask maybe this question this
Can I
other way.
follow on that question?
Yeah.
So to summarize, I look at it as pros and cons. What are the pros you get out of it by waiting? You get the higher return on investment for those first year or two. What are the cons you get? We have to do 2 separate sets of regs, and I know we're a reg machine, and I know we can switch them at any point, but you're doing 2 separate sets of regs. You're doing 2 separate sets of processes. You have different sets of forms that you're going to develop, and then change over. You have different auditing protocols you're going to have to develop under each scenario. Then you get into the actual staffing. You're bringing in contract employees or contract firms, because if we're going to make this decision to go electronic monitoring in the future, these positions that we're going to bring on for the manual process, we can't hire them as FTEs, which then, how do you bring the people in? Are you going to bring in, I mean, if I'm looking at it for my auditors, I'm going to bring in an accounting firm. It's going to be much harder to bring in temporary FTEs, train them to get rid of them. So I bring in an accounting firm that has probably a little higher cost than you'd pay for FTEs. You're going to go from a vanilla environment, which we're trying to bring in with the slot parlor, to the desired manipulated environment that we want by the time the full resort casinos open up, while you're opening up the full resort casinos versus testing it and managing and massaging our reports while you're in the 1,250 machine phase. And then you have some additional startup cost of doing it while the floor is operating at the slot parlor. So, the pros and the cons are its cost and the return on investment. Well, and then there's the final one of will our vendors hold their price for a year? Will they hold it for 6 months? Will they hold it for whatever that undetermined period of time is, or determined period of time is? So that's the way I try to look at the situation. And yeah, Bruce would have the problem of training, and then either shifting 6 people when the positions open up, or having to post temporary positions.
Let me ask this question this way. Has there been any other jurisdiction that has been doing any kind of manual old technology and transition into something like a central monitoring system? In other words, is the only real time to decide is before we have any of these operations? I realize that places like Vegas in New Jersey, with so much history and so many machines, is almost unfeasible to try to retrofit a number of machines of that size. But are there any other jurisdictions, to anybody's knowledge?
Not
where
aware of
these
any,
could
but
have
I
been-
but I do know that, and Derek, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when we visited Ohio, they said if they didn't stand up with an automated system, but the director told us that if he had the opportunity today, that he would. But
Well, what he said was he didn't have the opportunity because of how quickly they had to get their places open. If he had the information that we've been able to do, it would be a much more difficult decision for him to make. But with the timing he had, he was opening them as they were being built. He didn't have the lead-in time that we had, and I think his budget structure is a little different.
So there was no time to do a central monitoring system, but there was enough time to do it manually?
With the
In the case of Ohio?
With the Casino Control Commission, yeah.
Yes.
Well, there are plenty of options, and we've had this conversation on the record in the past. There are plenty of options for us to go out there and take a look at forms. It's just you're implementing one, you're writing your regs based on that, and you're getting your operators working on that. And now you're going to switch and implement new forms. So there's a time and a cost to that. I mean, we're not going to recreate the wheel. We're going to try and use as much as other jurisdictions have in any of these processes, which is why in the vanilla environment that comes with GTEC, it's based on reports that other jurisdictions use regularly. It's not the massaged reports that we may want in the future.
So you can shift midstream, but you've outlined the cost and benefits of doing
Yeah,
so.
it's not ideal. It's not ideal, and that's why we had Penn put down separate wires in the floor while they were doing construction, because we had this conversation: can you shift midstream? I mean, we'd ideally like to start it up this way, but in the long run, we don't want to be doing manual processes. We want to do this electronically. So,
What is your, what's the central benefit of your notion of waiting? What's the bottom line you get?
Well, the return on investment, the upfront cost. The main argument against this is a significant upfront cost. And in my, and by design, it has a yearly cost, most of which is the software or the hardware needed. It's a fixed cost.
But what is an upfront, I thought we paid a flat fee each year.
Yes.
So what do you mean by an upfront cost?
When you prorate that upfront cost on 1250 machines, which are the number of machines that we're going to have for the next 2.5 or 3 years or more, there's a significant cost upfront because it's not prorated on as many machines. When, in other words, the business case that we make here, when you do it over 10,000 machines or whatever, 7,000 machines, in my view, that upfront cost is really those economies of scale. Those
So if we postpone this for a year,
right.
what we would save, whatever the difference is between doing it manually and $2.6 million. Something
Yes,
like that. So
yes.
we would-
In addition, we'd have a lot more certainty when the other machines are coming into place. Right now, we're making good assumptions, but it could actually be further than what the current timelines that we have on those machines, as well as Region C. Who knows what will happen in Region C? We might know next month, for all we know, right?
Even if you would take Region C, just forget Region C.
Right.
It's, the business case is that in a 10-year period, it's basically a wash. So forget Region C.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, if
Well, the business, excuse me, if I understand that correctly, the business case is, it's a wash with 3 facilities,
Right.
right?
If you
Operating,
forget Region C, I see.
operating, all of which are operating in 2.5 years.
Right. Right. And to me, it just doesn't, if there were an extraordinary amount of money, it would certainly be something we'd probably have to do to postpone it. But the logic of spending a year or so in a manual environment, and then switching over, it just seems so counterintuitive, and it's just, if it isn't a devastating amount of money, it just doesn't make very much sense to me. We have to operate. I think you had mentioned, I thought where you were going to go earlier was, would there be a way that we could change the payment structure?
that's another option.
If we could ramp the payment structure, say it's going to be $26 million, but instead of $2,600,000 per year, year 1 was $1 million and year 10 was $4.5 million, and it ramped. That would be perfectly reasonable, and I would think that GTEC might consider that. We might end up paying a little bit more on the back end as a consequence, but that would certainly would flatten the cash flow, and even, if we had some kind of an out clause, if there is a radical change in assumptions, I don't consider only 3 facilities a radical change in assumptions, but if there's new legislation or something, we went to 2, then the whole world is a whole different place. And if we had some kind of an option to get out of this in the event of a radical change in assumptions, again, you'd probably have to pay a penalty, but if you could get out of it, then if we could negotiate those 2 points, it seems to me that would accommodate your legitimate concern without forcing us to go through this really, I think, counterintuitive manual first and then in parallel and then switching over. Now, I don't know how much of you can address those two issues, either of you, but would you consider ramping the payment schedule, A, and B, would you consider some kind of an out clause in the event that we had a radical change in our circumstances?
I don't feel that I can give you a solid answer, just having had the conversation for the first time now. It's something that we'd be willing to take back and look at. Certainly during a negotiation process is when that would typically happen, but
Right.
I can't say yes, I won't say no. It's certainly something that we're willing to take back and look at.
And on the out clause, I have talked to Matt about this because it's not a specific negotiation, but they do have that in other contracts with other jurisdictions. And it does come with a penalty.
So there, sorry, just to make sure, so there is a pretty good pretty good likelihood, it sounds like, that we could negotiate a way to get out of this, albeit there would be some kind of a penalty, but we could get out of this if the world changed on us. That's what I'm hearing you say.
We have similar types of clauses in other contracts, but again, there are a lot of variables in those clauses that would need to be negotiated.
And did I understand you to say earlier that that's not the kind of question that can be asked and answered definitively at this stage of the proceedings?
No, it cannot, because it wasn't part of our RFR, so we'd have to select them, start negotiations,
Yeah.
to start those types of specific conversations of what are the exact penalties with an out clause. Asking them, do you do this in
got it.
another area? That's
it.
fine.
Would it also require, if we get to the point that MGM makes about having a conversation between the technical folks and potentially GTEC or somebody else, that in order to have that conversation, we would also need to make a decision as to select them? Because I don't understand how that would potentially change the RFR process.
We could ask them to. We'd have to say anyone who wants to participate in that conversation is available to, but we can't require, they're not a contractor yet. I can't require them to do anything. So I think that given the situation, they'd probably be more than likely willing to have that conversation. I can't answer for them, but I can't require them to, no. But you can invite them to have that conversation. There's nothing that hurts the procurement rules by inviting them to have that conversation.
So for me personally, this is bigger than a fiscal issue. One of the things we didn't spend a lot of time discussing, which I think adds great value, is if we did wait a year, and I understand the downside to doing that, the certainty here in the Commonwealth, I think there's great uncertainty right now, and it's not just Regency in moving all of these facilities in a timely manner. And secondly, I think there's great value in a partnership exploring another option, which would be partnering with New Jersey. Having been there, I see that as something that is worth exploring. So it's the fiscal issue, it's the uncertainty here. We're basing all our assumptions on 10,000 machines, and also the value in a good faith effort to really explore another option. Those three things are all important to me and worth considering, even though there is a downside of not moving forward. But again, it's 1,250 machines.
Let me add, I think this notion that there's going to be a cost, which I think there will be, in terms of training somebody and then having to retrain them on something else. Just like you characterized some of my concerns as not that significant, I think those may not be all that significant. I think, and I'm purely speculating here, but knowing what we're going to be automating rather than trusting a machine to do it for us from the get-go may have some value. If we have some knowledge as to what we are checking manually first, that now the machine is going to do for us. Again, the slots parlor is a test case in many cases. It is for our player management system. It is for how we're going to be implementing many of our own procedures and organizing, et cetera. This could very well just be another one in which we first figure out, now firsthand, and this may be true just for someone like me, observing what it means, understanding better what SAS versus G2S, et cetera, means when it comes to these issues and how they correlate, may get me further comfortable with the notion that automation is the way to go. I'm there when it comes to, as I've said before, the business case for about, for 10,000 machines or thereabouts, even 7,000 machines. But I also don't want to rely 100% on the black box, if you will, because the computer is going to tell us everything.
So you're not sold on the idea that automation is the way to go?
No.
Okay.
So to address a few of those points, Commissioner,
Yep.
we would still have to have audit procedures, and we'd have to know how the casino is bringing their revenue figures to us, because if we have a discrepancy on meter reads, if we have a discrepancy between our meter reads, their meter reads, and possibly their final reconciliation, we would have to go back and check all the paperwork. So that's going to be part of the procedures anyway, so you'll have to know that one way or another. Having a separate machine do it gives us another level of confidence and transparency of the public, which is one of the main things. And then, we're just talking about meter reads at this point. You're not talking about where we gain most of our efficiencies, which is on the asset management side. So I know these systems started off to verify meters, but the main place they're used now is on the asset management side of the house. And, the accounting side, we still, I mean, as you've seen with regular accounting systems, yeah, they make it easier. You're not writing in ledgers, but you still have to have the foundational supporting documentation to generate those reports. And that's what this machine would do. It would pull out the exceptions for us, and we'd be able to review them based on that versus a typical auditing procedure.
Right, but we're not operating with nothing else, right? There are house systems. There will be systems that we will have access to, that the casino operators themselves do. We have internal control procedures. We have cameras and many other things to help us verify a number of things and ensure a lot of the integrity of the cash collection. I guess anyway, I've made my point, and
So
that's
that's the difference of automation versus manual.
versus manual,
And
right?
whether you think that we need a manual versus an automated system.
Right. And what I'm saying though is this period, if we put off this decision for some period of time, in addition with what Commissioner Cameron was saying, help us explore and understand better whether there is any real feasibility to some of the other alternatives. And then had both more certainty as to the number and timing of some of these machines, and are comfortable with how we're going to implement this system or not, I think it could really get us there. In other words, I think this decision today, from my perspective, even though there's a slot parlor coming up sometime in June, may be a little premature. That's where I come from.
Yeah, I have the same sense.
Any other thoughts, questions? As far as the MGM letter takes the position relative to cost, I don't think we really need to get into that very much. The other stuff, it does seem to me, is does not a go, no-go decision on a CMS. There's these other topics are operational topics, and whether there should be appropriate grandfathering and so forth, and how good the firewall is and so forth. But I don't think that meeting needs to be held prior to this decision if we are ready to make the decision.
Well, I'd like to understand whether there is really no correlation between the regs as we've grandfathered some of these protocols and the CMS. I still don't understand why that may be an issue. I know you don't think it is, John, and I believe that. I want to understand.
There's no impact
what-
on the CMS because the CMS can handle either set of protocols. So if we were to go back and revise our regulations to allow the SAS protocol for an additional period of time, no impact. Okay? I mean, I think that's basically, the reason we obligated the G2S protocol is it's a richer set of data, and we believed it would give us more information about the activities at the machine, and it would also provide some interoperability. The responsible gaming framework, messaging, actually it's the informed player class of the G2S data set. There's more information available, and I think, you know, our position is data to regulate, so the richer the set of data we're collecting, the more information we have. So that was the logic behind setting the date of January 1st, 2017. I think we'd be willing to revisit that in conversations as we look at revisions to those regulations.
And that would eliminate this concern that they state.
Right, yeah, well, Rick was pointing out there's a cost for each device that would be connected would require a system management interface board at an incremental cost of about $350. So if you put an older SAS-based machine in, that's going to require that box that basically splits the signal coming out of the back of the machine. So, but there is no impact. I mean, that concern can be, I think, mitigated pretty easily.
Just to be clear, GTEC did not quote that cost of $350 per SMIP, so I think John's just going with a
Yeah, generic.
off the top, what he found in a magazine.
But there
There is a cost. Thanks, Derek. Thanks for your faith in my estimating skills.
Mr. Chairman, I think you identified when you were talking about it, and Commissioner McHugh, is the industry perspective, and we have received earlier letters and issues from the industry that match very closely in many cases what we've seen today. We saw some new issues raised, but I think the Penn letter actually describes the crux of the problem, because it says the employment of a reliable central server system itself poses no significant issues for Penn other than the upfront and ongoing operational cost. So Penn has been upfront and opposed it from the initial stage, as I think have the other two licensees. There's a basic difference, I think, over what is the best regulatory avenue to move forward with. And that, I think, has a foundation of, even if we had further discussions, I really believe we would be at the same place. Is this the best regulatory step for the Commission and the Commonwealth, and or not?
How about the fact that, I don't know that we've explored this enough, the concern that there hasn't been sufficient discussion with the licensees or with the Commission over the potential conflict. Typically, as a commission, we have not taken another jurisdiction's investigation or their thought process as something we should adopt without our own thought process with regard to a conflict. So I know that you asked our legal team, but that's not something that we publicly discussed or we were informed about the reasons for they think that there is not a conflict. And I know we're talking about minutes from another jurisdiction, but we've never taken another jurisdiction's, whether it be for an investigation or any other a regulation. We've never just wholesale said, they said it was okay, so we should as well.
If I might just try to weigh in a little bit, and Derek and John, if you have another thought, is, and I think this is what Derek's been saying, so if I'm misportraying it, let me know, but I know you will. If there's the selection, I think we have the opportunity, and I think that's the opportunity to successfully, so a selection doesn't say GTEC has this bid, we have to successfully negotiate an agreement with them in that process. And if during our negotiation, if we feel we have to have an additional background check, or we have to make sure that separation is there, I can't see any reason why that can't be a condition of the process. And I think you're correct. We ought to look very carefully at that and make sure we're convinced ourselves that there is that sufficient separation before we would ever recommend the commission actually accepting the contract in the end.
That's accurate.
Okay, any,
So just to follow up on Cameron's point, to take that step, why doesn't that allow us an opportunity to, as the MGM letter discusses, having our licensees come in, talk about the technical capacities, talk about the scalability issue, which Commissioner Zuniga raised, as long as it's consistent with the solicitation process and that GTEC has been identified as the preferred vendor, certainly through a dollar and cents identifier. Having them at the table to kind of further the discussion is per MGM's letter.
I didn't get, so what was that point?
Well, if we're going to take this time, I think as Director Day agreed with Commissioner Cameron's point of looking at this issue of the GTEC IGT merger and any conflict of interest. Take that time to have this conversation as per the request of MGM, and I'm sure the other licensees would agree to sit down again with GTEC if it's allowable for them to be at the table. I'm interested in the scalability of this and not getting hung up on the front end with some high costs that we're passing along to our licensees. And just walking through the technical issues, the regulatory issues, and see if we can come back with a recommendation at the end.
One thing is I want to make sure, the difference is what I was talking about is basically a situation where it's a selection of GTEC pending successful negotiations and certain conditions. So that, at least that's what I was talking about from my perspective. So
I understand that,
Okay.
but I think to Commissioner Cameron's point is, looking at whatever was presented to Pennsylvania, as she rightly concludes, we do things a little bit differently regardless of what other jurisdictions do. It just takes some time in that intervening period to have the conversation between our licensees and Derek and John and GTEC again, if it's allowable for them to be at the table.
the conversation is always beneficial. But Commissioner Evans, I even say that respectfully with the the licensees, I believe the bottom line of that discussion is not going to change. But
Well, it won't change relative to whether we should have a CMS or not, but they can hash out some of these issues about, his last paragraph, and we all need to have the technical conversation. It won't be a go, no-go, but it could certainly resolve questions and resolve the
So,
So I do want to make a comment on the conflict of interest situation. Of the vendors that responded to the RFR, GTEC and one of the other vendors have gaming divisions, which they keep separate. And before IGT, I believe GTEC did have a gaming division. As Spilo?
Correct.
So that's been part of their business model. And I believe that the reason that other jurisdictions have found it to be acceptable is that the regulatory operation, the intelligent operation that runs this software for regulators is an entirely separate entity, and there is no inner play. And I think that's what you're going to find out. I wanted to make the point that this is a business model that exists out there in two of the top vendors of regulatory software that we looked at.
And I just want to say, back to my original statement, if that's what the commission would prefer, that's a valid point, that you don't want to start negotiations with someone that you feel there may be a conflict with. So if you want us to look into something, we should be given that directive. We'll look into it. We can ask GTEC to sit down with this group and have the technical conversation, but we can't require them to, because they're not our vendor, unless we enter into a contract, unless we say we're going to award it and we won't actually sign a contract, so we're going to make the decision that they'll be our vendor. And we're not going to actually sign the contract until you come back with something to us on specifics of what is the financing schedule, what is the best thing they can do, what are the specifics behind the penalties that you'd have to pay at what point when you get out, what is the true separation that exists between, not true, but what are the barriers that are put in place that can make us feel comfortable? So we can either decide to say, yes, we're going to choose you as our vendor, and you can start negotiations, and here are the points I want you to negotiate on and we'll bring a contract back in front of us with all these finalized things. Or it's go forth, IEB, do an investigation similar to what Pennsylvania did, come back and report on us, and then we'll decide. And then in the interim, if you could all sit down and have this conversation, we'd appreciate it, but it's not going to, we can't say it's going to reflect on the contract one way or another. I mean, it's not fair to ask them to do that without.
Where are we on the timing? At one point, I thought we were saying that they needed 6 months to get, the decision get made and get these things installed. At what point are we seriously compromising the ability to get the system up and running properly?
Pretty much right now.
Yeah, today.
Which is why we had originally said we'd give this 2 weeks, review it, and then hash out a very, very generic contract that would put in a bland, a vanilla version of this for the go-live date that Penn was expecting. And I think the initial schedule that came before you said January 9th was when we wanted to have the contract signed. In other conversations, there is some wiggle room there, a week or two, to actually hash out and negotiate these things. But it would be a concerted effort for us to sit down if you decided today to negotiate all these things and to get the
But
investigations
I thought
done.
both you and John were fairly cavalierly saying if we don't want to make a decision now, that's okay with you.
I didn't
Well,
sense any
I-
cavalier.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm open to continuing collaboration, but I think we risk being able to successfully implement if we don't have a decision to partner with GTEC today and move it forward from that point. I think from a planning and engagement standpoint, any further deferral is going to risk us being able to make the 5/30 date for system go-live, which is, at this point is a month in advance of the published opening of 6/30.
And what I had gone through were the pros and the cons of opening on time with it versus at a later date when the facility's already up and running. So what I had said is you can do it either way. Is there a preferred method? I said, yes, we'd like to have it at the beginning. Can we do it with the facility up and running? Yes, we can do that, and here are the pros and the cons.
I'm not clear, are we going to hear from MGM before we move forward with this process? Wasn't that part of or did we make a decision about that? They
There's
were-
no, we can do whatever you want.
Well, so they were prepared to come speak to us, right, today? Isn't that what we heard
Correct.
early on? I mean, I don't think we've said no yet to someone who wanted to speak to us on a topic, so I'd be prepared to listen to what they have to say.
Fine with me.
Yield the mic.
Just jump back to our old things.
Actually, let's just have a very short break, and we'll then come back and talk to MGM. We lost MGM.
Well, the notebook is there. Maybe we could just rummage through that and see.
Yeah, can somebody read me the MGM notes? Okay, we are reconvened. Counselors.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. For the record, Marty Anastasia from Brown Rudnick, consultant to MGM, and I'm joined by my colleague Jed Nozel, regulatory counsel for MGM. I just wanted to start by touching on Commissioner Cameron's comments, which I thoroughly appreciated. Over the course of the last 3 years, the commission has conducted themselves in a very collaborative manner. In fact, they've proven to be very innovative and independent, so much so that they have never relied on the assumptions or the decisions of other jurisdictions. They've conducted their own thoughtful and deliberate examinations, investigations, and discussions. And we think this is one of those areas where, once again, the commission should conduct themselves in that collaborative manner, and that's sort of what we're asking for here, to be involved in those discussions and coordinate with all the stakeholders. Before I move on to my colleague, Jed Nozel, I also did want to touch on the manual systems. We believe, or MGM believes, they are effectively used in other jurisdictions. They are a reliable management system that ensures the integrity of the casino floor and the independent games. I just wanted to make that point clear, and I'll pass it on to Jed Nozel.
So, thanks. And, we've had the benefit, obviously, of hearing your discussions this morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. And we just want to add some additional, I think, comment to that, and certainly having the benefit of that. And really, I'm going to talk briefly about sort of 3 points, building a little bit on Marty's piece about, and I think what the commission is sort of thinking about now is, when is the appropriate time in order to perform some sort of additional due diligence regarding the issue of the potential conflict. And I use that term in sort of its broadest ways, not only from a legal perspective, but also operational, as well as, any impact on what it may mean for the market in Massachusetts. In addition, after that, we do think there is value in what we've described as a technical session. It's something I don't think that traditionally has been used by the commission, and we do operate sort of within the confines of certain rules regarding how information can be passed back and forth to the commission. But when you're dealing with a highly technical issue and one that deals with specific costs and I think could benefit from more of a forum that involves a back and forth conversation, ability for the parties to interact and ask each other's questions, sometimes that can really bring a lot of value to the decision maker in understanding exactly what we're doing before we actually take that step. And certainly, I can represent from the perspective of MGM on this particular issue, they will bring the resources here quickly and do that as efficiently and under whatever schedule that the commission sets for that to happen. And I think there is value in that, and it certainly allows for a better, I think, product in the end and a better informed decision as well. And I think here, really the ability to have the IT people interact directly with the folks from GTEC as well as the commission staff, I think would add a lot of benefit to this particular project. And then I also want to talk a little bit, and I hope the commission does consider this issue of delay. There may be another benefit to that. To the extent that the commission, and the commission I believe touched on this, really thinking about this from the perspective of, what will we know in a year? We're going to know more about our own market, and we're probably going to know more about the technology and whether or not the G2S system is being adopted at a greater frequency. And I think we're going to have a better understanding of what we're dealing with. It's quite possible that that information is going to provide more certainty to this particular marketplace and could involve potentially a better or more dynamic product or even a better price from a company like GTEC. So I do think there is some value in that, in allowing essentially some of the uncertainties that have been discussed to be considered after a period of time. Understanding and listening, and to the points certainly that have been made about the, both I think as Mr. Lennon put, sort of the pros and cons about that decision. But I did want to put that in front of the commission, I think in the pro column as well. With that, I think we're available to answer questions, obviously on a limited ability on the super technical side, so I hope you'll excuse that. But if there's anything else we can provide the commission in connection with its deliberations, we're happy to do that.
Well, I have one question, and that's based on the point you raised last. Why, and I've asked it before. Why don't you see the G2S other SMS
Deadline.
conversation as a separate conversation, related but separate, from the, do we do a CMS or not?
You know, Commissioner, I'm going to be careful here, and I think I think this kind of goes to our point of, really these type of issues being discussed. I can't say for certain that in fact is the case. I certainly can't represent that to you today. I certainly respect staff's position on that, but, that is the perfect question where, certainly a back and forth and sort of probing that I suggested that we could do in a forum like a technical session. I think we could get to the absolute bottom to that. It's a good process, I think, that we engage in here, and once in a while it's imperfect for certain subject matter. Sometimes we're caused to react, and, I also didn't want to let sort of the issue of costs completely slide by.
Right.
I mean, Derek's done some wonderful work on analysis. We just see some additional analysis today. Certainly, I think we'd be, we certainly like the opportunity to continue to digest that and provide some additional information regarding costs that may or may not be known by the internal team.
And how quickly could you assemble the people that are essential for the conversation you envision?
I talked to Mr. Mathis just during our break, and he made a representation to me, and I feel he may be watching, that he can make that happen as soon as possible. I'm sure I'm going to get a text probably in a few minutes, but we're committed to working on the schedule that the commission sets for that. We understand sort of the necessity of gathering that information, and I feel comfortable making a commitment that we'll get people here, the right people, in order to make that happen quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
I'm done. Thank you.
Thanks
Okay.
again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to ask Matt to step back to the mic and speak to conversations which GTEC is having with MGM in Maryland.
I just wanted to state for the record, if you determine that a technical meeting or discussion should take place, GTEC would be happy to participate. And in the interest of time, if you wanted it to be more quickly, I would ask, we've had a number of conversations with MGM over the past 6 months regarding the property they're preparing to open in the state of Maryland in the summer of 2016. So if the technical team from MGM were the same people that are involved in Maryland, they already have some familiarity with our system, and I think that it would eliminate a bit of a learning curve if they brought a new team in. But those conversations have already happened. We're not contractually obligated to have those conversations in Maryland. We are, because it's in the best interest of the state and the gaming program, and we'd be happy to do that here as well.
On that note, do you know if Maryland is, are you going to implement, or looks like you're going to implement in Maryland, a central monitoring system similar to what we have here?
We have a central monitoring system in Maryland. We have been operating it for the past 4.5 years.
So MGM will be a part of that when it opens.
Correct.
Every casino there started with one, or was there any similarities to what I was describing in my scenario?
The system was, I believe, part of the enabling legislation in Maryland, and the system was up and running prior to the first facility opening.
Thank you.
So the discussions are, with MGM in Maryland, are implementation discussions, not go, no-go discussions.
Correct, but they're discussions
I understand.
involving our system as well.
Right.
So you're doing in Maryland, like with the Maryland Live facility, precisely what we're talking about doing here, the CMS.
It's not Maryland.
Very much the same. There are some requirements that are different between the two states, but it's by and large the same set of requirements, yes.
Okay. All right, so where are we? Anybody
Yeah, I've been really on the fence from the beginning on this, and here's where I am now. I see the personnel cost, automation cost as essentially a wash. Given the, we talked about that last time, we've talked about that a couple of times. There is, depending on your scenarios, there's about a $5 million potential spread over a 10-year period, depending on what scenarios or assumptions you make. And that's not parking meter money, but over 10 years, it's not, for me, dispositive. It's probably going to be somewhere in the middle of that. It's either going to be slightly positive or slightly negative. So that's why I view that as a wash. I think the asset management benefit is a significant benefit, although I must say that we're going to have 3 locations. I've seen the asset management piece in Louisiana, where they have a centralized system, but they have 15,000 machines in 600 locations or something like that, and it seems to me impossible to regulate them without this kind of a thing. It would be more feasible to do asset management here manually than it is in such a widespread thing. But I still think asset management is a benefit. I think the benefits in terms of transparency of a full, essentially real-time financial reports as opposed to manual sample reports is a significant benefit. And that's something that this system would provide, and that's an essential difference between manual and automation. And I also think that if we're going to do this, I understand that we could wait. I understand that it would be potentially a little more costly to do it initially, but I generally agree with Derek's cost-benefit analysis. I think the benefits that we would gain from the additional costs would favor doing it initially and getting it up and running before Penn opens. It's still, for me, a close question. I would like to have, just to make sure that I understand all of the issues, and I think that I do, but every time we have this conversation, a slightly different issue comes up. And for me, this is such a close call that I'd like to have assurance that I have all the issues. I would like to have that common conversation that MGM is talking about. I'd like to have it quickly. I think we need to stay on track for Penn's opening, to have this up and not have this delay Penn's opening. So I'd like to have that and like to come back, if it's possible, in 2 weeks and make the final decision. That's where I am now. That's my preferred outcome.
Which means the technical as well as the conflict issues, have some kind of a meeting to discuss those issues in the interim?
I'm more, yes. To the extent we can deal with the conflict issues in the 2 weeks, that's desirable. But I would be prepared, if there are no technical or other impediments, to go ahead with the conflict resolution at the hands of the IEB being a condition of the execution of the contract.
So it's the technical issues?
It's really the technical issues that I'm most concerned about now.
I agree with everything that the commissioner said except the conclusion. And I would go forward today and have those discussions be part of the negotiating process. But for all the reasons that you outlined, well, I think I don't feel it's as close as you do. I feel it's a pretty clear decision, and I would say that we should move forward today.
And I'd be inclined to, because this is a very difficult decision, I feel like, and the more information, the better, and we've set a tone of really discussing these issues in public and not after we award contracts. So I would be inclined if we could handle both issues in the next couple of weeks. And maybe that's some testimony on a potential conflict and certainly a technical discussion. I would be more comfortable making a decision after having both of those issues discussed in public.
Yeah, same here, including the last point that Mr. Nosel made relative to providing additional feedback on some of the assumptions relative to cost. But, you know, but I come down on the same place as Commissioner McHugh and Cameron.
Mr. Stebbins?
Their statements or comments are consistent with my line of thinking, I'd also like to raise the question, or if we can have the discussion this intervening period about the scalability. The
About
budget,
what?
scalability and the ability to budget this out over time, to the extent that we can without
Right. Even though they're not
impacting
required.
our solicitation process.
What's the scale of, you mean the scalability of the payments?
Yeah.
What I was talking about, of ramping it? Yeah, okay. Well, I guess we don't need a vote really, do we? If what we're saying is let's postpone and kick the can down the road for 2 weeks.
I would certainly favor that. I've already said I'd favor that. I would also favor a sort of consensus that 2 weeks from now, we're going to decide this. And really would urge everybody to, I know we're putting a lot of pressure on people who have many things to do, but I really would like to have a full, rich conversation within that 2-week period so that we can decide it the right way.
I agree with that. 2 week is a firm date for our next meeting and make a
Yeah.
decision.
So
Okay.
you're saying have those discussions in 2 weeks and then decide right away, not have those discussions in the interim?
Have the discussions in the interim among the staff folks and the other participants and get a report of their outcome, including whatever anybody who's a participant wants to say to us directly. But have those discussions, try to come to some resolution of things, including does the two-system question naturally fit to one side of this basic decision? And if not, why not? So that we don't necessarily have to resolve that issue right away, but we certainly need to face it. But is it part of this, a necessary part of this conversation from a technical standpoint, or is that something that's simply a decision we can make down the road as well as who bears the cost of it? And whatever other questions are not central to this and can be put to one side for later decision ought to be part of this. It seems to me, collaborative discussion that the last paragraph of MGM's letter envisions.
Commissioners, just for my clarity and I think our follow-up is, I can handle the 2 weeks. So I know what that means, and the scalability, I think I understand, are shifting the expenses further on in the contract period. I understand that, the technical conference that MGM has been discussing, and the conflict of interest question.
Right.
And in the meantime, the S2S question on the machines, I think regardless of the outcome, we'll look at that as we propose those final regulations anyway, and we can have this as part of discussion as to how much it pertains to the conversation we're in about central management.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. That's my view.
I just have to say for the record, I really disagree. I mean, not with the things we're going to learn, we should learn them with that, but I think we're doing a disservice to our professional staff by not making this decision. I think we're doing a disservice to a vendor. I hope they keep their price. And I think we have chewed this thing beyond reason. That's just my own thoughts. Okay, so
We've got our homework. Thank you very much, Commissioners. Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up,
So I have a positive report, a very positive report. We're going to talk about the Gaming Technology Laboratory. And we've talked a couple of times in the past about the hybrid model which MGC is going to stand up, and helping us to stand up that model. So we have regulations, and we are working on business processes to be able to enact those regulations, to permit platforms and to work with manufacturers and the testing laboratories. And I want to introduce some people who have joined us here today who are helping with that effort. We've engaged consultant Power Strategies, and we have two members of that team. Stephanie Maddox is a principal of president of Power Strategies. She's opened more than 50 properties and has 26 years in the gaming industry. Stephanie. Frank Naborski is a principal and a vice president of Power Strategies. Has spent 18 years at Mohegan, has 35 years in the industry. And they are helping me with standing up the business processes that we're going to use for the lab to be able to enact the regulations. So we have a draft of that. It's not ready for prime time, but we're working on it, and we expect to have to be able to share that with our licensees, with the labs, and with the manufacturers very shortly. Also joining us today are representatives from two of the preeminent labs in the U.S. that do testing. Travis Foley, Executive Vice President of Operations for BMM Test Labs, has been in the industry 20 years. 13 of those years, he was the gaming lab manager, the director of the lab in Nevada, and he's been with BMM for 3 years. And then from Gaming Laboratories International, Patrick Moore is the senior director for GLI, and he's been with them for 13 years. And Ali Galavani, Gaming Business Development for GLI, has been in the industry for 26 years and spent a number of years with the New Jersey Department of Gaming Enforcement, the Technical Services Bureau in the Department of Gaming Enforcement in New Jersey. So we're very happy to be working with these folks, and it's a good group. Further to standing up the laboratory, we're in the process of hiring a gaming technology manager. We have 3 candidates, which we are in the process of vetting and interviewing. We hope we get a viable one. We hope we get somebody out of that group. It's been very difficult. It's such a niche type of a role, and I think there aren't that many people that have that skill set. So Stephanie and
is
Frank,
that a different job description from what you've been looking for before? Is this the same?
No, it's the same
Same
one.
job
I think I think the question is what venues. We haven't got a lot of response in the standard places where we would post this, whether it's the Commonwealth site or on Monster. But with Power Strategies' help, we have been able to do some target placement of the job description in more industry-related periodicals and also contacts. I mean, sometimes it really is who you know. So we've drawn, I think, a broader field, and we have some candidates. Hopefully, one of them will work out. That's my hope, because it's been open now for 8 or 10 months. I mean, a while. A couple of other things. So we have a short-term approach to opening up for Penn. They have 1,250 machines, which are going to have to be permitted and put into the asset system. Obviously, having the CMS decision up in the air is going to affect how we stand up the laboratory, but for the short term, we are going to engage. First of all, we're going to certify the laboratories, and then we have an agreement to engage GLI to test the 1,250 machines, to do the system test, and to help us open up, so that they've provided a fixed price bid well, it's not fixed price, it's less than 500 hours of time at their standard billable rate of $136 an hour to help us get Plain Ridge open. In addition to that, they will also help with, if we choose to do the CMS, the independent certification of the CMS platform as well, and the certification of the house system, the slot management system as well. So that's the short-term approach. Longer term, we're going to be a multi-lab state. BMM, who Travis represents, we'll also certify them, or if they apply to be certified. So in the future, either GLI or BMM will be able to do testing on behalf of Massachusetts for our technical standards. So that's where we are. I think we're going to be able to support Penn's opening without being an encumbrance to their opening.
Question, Director, how did we select one lab over, there are many labs that do this work. How did we select one to do the work in the short term?
Commissioner, frankly, there are only two in the country, and they're both represented here today.
There are some smaller ones that do this work as well.
Eclipse, Nick Farley and Eclipse test in Ohio, but they are not ISO certified and will probably have difficulty getting our certification because they don't have the methodologies and practices in place of some of the larger labs. So it was a question of the timing and being able to do an open procurement, and I think the open procurement probably would have taken longer than we have to be able to open up Plain Ridge. So that was the reason that we decided to engage GLI directly rather than to openly procure it.
Can you, Director, explain the division of, at a very high level, the division of functions between our internal lab and BMM/GLI when both are certified?
So we have a set of technical standards, which at the current time mirror the GLI standards, which everybody uses.
Right.
So the process would be a manufacturer who desires to have a platform in a property here would sell that platform to the licensee and then come to us and apply for a permit for that platform. So they would then go to GLI or BMM, whatever their choice is, because it's their business relationship, for a certification that the platform meets our technical standards.
Right.
And it would then come to our lab manager for a final review. We have the option in our regulations to test that machine ourselves.
Okay.
But the final say, after the fact that it's certified to operate, is the gaming lab's decision. Further, if we choose to go with a central management system, there will be some additional testing to ensure interoperability of those platforms with the central management system, and that would possibly also be done either by GTEC or with some help from GLI or BMM.
And then if something goes wrong, or there's questions, or there's issues, the lab would have the capacity to do some forensic or incident recreation and the like.
That's correct. They have a deep technical
Right.
staff and
Right.
engineers, et cetera.
Right, yeah.
Did you mention 850, or did I hear 850 machines or 1,250?
1,250 machines.
I
The
misheard.
idea is to get all of, and
Right.
Penn, in collaboration, has already shared their initial inventory of 300 machines with us so that we can look at, we're looking to make the process move along very quickly in terms of making sure that those machines get certified. So Lance has been very cooperative, Lance and his VP of slot operations.
So, just in terms of mechanics, are we now, or at a future short-term time, certifying those two, BMM and GLI, or we've already done so, or just catch me up to that?
We have not done so, so
Yep.
the certification process is part of those business procedures which are in draft form and which we should have a version that's reviewable internally for the commission within the next several weeks.
Oh, those you alluded to at the beginning of, yep.
Right, but the plan would be, as a first step, before we even allow them to certify machines on our behalf to certify them.
Yes. Yeah. From my perspective, the procurement, I think, is entirely appropriate, or the approach. You know, had we had the desire to procure these openly, we would have likely ended with the same two labs that I'm familiar with that also do
Well,
maybe 99%.
I do want to say, you know, I'm in full transparency. I told Travis that we were, you know, doing this, and he was disappointed, but he understood the reasoning and the logic. So,
Well, we had the benefit, I think many of us have had the benefit over the past couple of years of visiting both labs in Las Vegas and seeing the operation. They both are high-quality labs run by high-quality people. So that process is wound up in a very good place as far as I can see. And it's great that we are getting some expert assistance in setting up this lab, because I think with that kind of an outline, we'll be prepared to deal with the contingencies we need to deal with as we move forward. So I think this is a great strategy.
yes, we're really happy to be partnering with both BMM and GLI, and Power Strategy as well.
I'm sorry.
I was, just a quick question about the recruitment process. Do you have a timeline, posting date, posting deadline?
I have 3 candidates which we've vetted out of a field of 15. So we have top 3 that have industry and engineering experience. They've been phone screened by Dean, and I think we're going to bring at least the top 2 of them in and have a conversation. So I think we're down the road. I'm just hoping that one of the candidates has the right stuff. We really need somebody who's dynamic, because it's as much relationship management, right? I mean, in New Jersey, there's a staff of 50. They test their own machines. They do their own expertise. Whoever we hire, along with an engineer, is going to be our in-house expert. I'm not an engineer by any means, right? So I think we're going to depend on our gaming lab manager to manage the relationship with BMM and GLI, and also to make sure that they're doing on our behalf what we are expecting them to do.
Timeline for hopefully hiring that person, or at least making a decision?
If one of these candidates works out, I would say we could do it within the next month. If not, I think we're back to square one, and I mean, it's been difficult to even get a field. Do you have any?
No, I mean, I think, like you said, we've looked at 15 resumes, been able to get it, hopefully with the 3 that we've seen, you'll be able to pick one of the 3. And that would certainly be able to speed up the timeline, because I know this has been an open procurement for quite a long time, and will certainly help the process move forward for Penn's opening.
Okay, good. Thanks, John.
Great.
All right. Thank you very much.
I was going to just, right now, our standards mirror the GLI standards. Are there, which many other jurisdictions do?
Yeah.
Are we thinking about that changing in the future? How is that, what's your thoughts relative to that?
You know, there are
testing.
some anomalies. The return to player percent, remember when we passed the regulations, there were some areas where the commission had some flexibility. I think the other area, as we revisit the current regulations, is the player management feature.
Right.
From the responsible gaming framework. That will become a component of the technical regs. So that will be an incremental test. Right now, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, Travis, or Ali, but the standard testing is done for one jurisdiction, and then it is transferable to another jurisdiction as long as there are no differences in the policy. So the fact that we're pretty much vanilla GLI standards means most all of the games that anybody's going to want to put into Massachusetts will work without additional testing, because they've already been passed unless they're a new platform. However, when we have specifics around the responsible gaming features, at that point, then there'll have to be an incremental test. They'll test to the GLI standards, and then there'll be a Massachusetts-only series of tests that are done to make sure that they meet our technical standards. That's the difference in the incremental difference. And, I hope that answers your question.
Yep, absolutely.
Great.
That's
Sounds
good.
great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Item number 4, Investigations and Enforcement Bureau. Pardon? What do you think? I mean, it's now 12:30. Don't think we have more than another hour, probably, if maybe less. Should we just go through and
Yeah,
get it
let's
done?
go.
Let's go through.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good
First
afternoon.
matter under Section 4 is the Region C update. The matter's on the agenda this morning primarily so we can give the public a reminder of the upcoming deadlines for Region C. We have discussed publicly and has been posted on our, as we have discussed publicly and has been posted on our website, interested applicants must schedule a scoping meeting no later than January 16th. That is next Friday. And by January 9th, tomorrow, the applicant must provide the commission with the following information. A list of entities and individuals the applicant believes are qualifiers under our regulations. B, a list of entities having more than a nominal ability to exert control over the applicant entity. C, a list of entities having greater than 5%, either voting or financial, in the applicant, or in an entity owning a 5% interest, either voting or financial, in the applicant. D, an organizational chart showing the upper-level positions held by individuals in each entity I've referenced. E, an ownership chart showing the owners of each entity I have referenced. For public companies, we only need to see ownership greater than 5%. And F, a list of entities and individuals for which the applicant is requesting a waiver under our regulations and the reason for the request. The full application is then due on the 30th of January. It is expected the applicant will have their substantially complete proposal in place by these deadlines. That includes their complete organizational structure, the complete equity interest of the partners, and the identification of the operator, their operations plan. So I just wanted to reiterate for the public and for those that are interested in applying, deadlines tomorrow. So I'm waiting for the information, and if it comes, then I'll report out to the commission as appropriate.
That list of A, B, C, D, all that stuff is due tomorrow.
Correct. Correct.
And you're construing that as a very hard stop,
Yep.
right? If you don't make it, you're out.
Correct. We've had several delays in the deadlines, and I think it's appropriate that we hold fast to what the commission has said is the deadline for Region C here.
Do we have has anybody met that condition yet?
I mean, at this point, I think it would be wise not to get into too much detail. Have I received information like this? Yes, I have, and I have a meeting scheduled next week. So I will report out to the commission once that process is completed on the details.
Okay.
So if there are no other questions, that's the first item on the agenda for the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau. The second item on the agenda this afternoon, 2 requests by MGM for temporary key gaming employee licenses. As you are aware, key employee licenses require commission approval for issuance, and therefore, for the temporary license, I'm coming before you as well. The first request is for a temporary key gaming employee executive license for Seth Stratton. Mr. Stratton has been hired by MGM as Vice President and General Counsel for MGM Springfield. He's a graduate of Colgate University with an additional master's in public affairs from UMass and a law degree from Suffolk University Law School. He's licensed to practice law in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Prior to his hire by MGM, he worked as an attorney and has never worked in a gaming company and has never held a gaming license. The preliminary investigation, which consists of a comprehensive baseline, has been completed with no significant issues to report at this time. At this initial stage, investigators believe there is a reasonable likelihood that the license for Mr. Stratton will be issued upon the completion of the background investigation. The full investigation will continue. The second request is for a temporary key gaming employee standard license for Mary Catherine Murrin. Ms. Murrin has been hired by MGM Springfield as Director of Training and Workforce Development. She is a graduate of the University of Connecticut with a bachelor's in economics and a master's in sports management. Prior to being hired by MGM, Ms. Murrin worked as the Executive Director and COO of the United States Tennis Association New England, and just prior to that for the United States Tennis Association as National Manager for schools and junior tennis teams.
Similar to Mr. Stratton, Ms. Murrin has never worked for a gaming company and has never held a gaming license. Like Mr. Stratton, preliminary investigation has been completed with no significant issues to report at this time, and investigators believe there's a reasonable likelihood that the license for Ms. Murrin will be issued upon the completion of the background investigation, and that full investigation will continue. So at this point, I believe there just would need to be a vote on the issuance of a temporary license for these two employees.
Have we done temporary licenses before?
We have not. So the temporary for the key game employees, this is our first one.
And what are the standards for issuing a temporary rather than waiting until the full investigation is
The
finished?
reasonable likelihood that it would issue, so that the investigation and Enforcement Bureau would have to certify that before the commission.
So on a less technical level, why do we issue?
So they can start work.
They can't officially do any work for MGM until they get,
They need the temporary license to get started, and they're looking to get going here.
It's at the request of,
That's right, it has to be the request of the licensee.
Okay,
Do we have,
sounds good.
is there time limit on the temporary period?
6 months.
6 months.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the commission extend a temporary key gaming license and a key gaming standard license?
There's two kinds of key game gaming employee, executive key gaming employee standard, based on the position they hold in the company. Mr. Stratton is the executive.
Executive,
and
Ms. Murrin is the standard. I move that the commission extend a temporary key gaming executive license to Seth Stratton and a key gaming employee standard license to Mary Kate Murrin.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you, that's all I have.
All right.
Thank you.
Item number 5 is Research and Responsible Gaming. Director Vanderlinden.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good
afternoon.
Happy New Year. So the first agenda item that we have is the play management policy. And I'm presenting to you the final draft of the recommendations for this. On December 4th, the Commission voted to adopt a play management system that includes limit-setting tools on a test basis, specifically for the Category 2 licensees. So that was, as I understand, the overall recommendation. There were numerous revisions to that with the specific features that you had recommended, and I'm bringing those before you today for a discussion. I'm not sure if you want me to just read down through each of the specific recommendations, how you would like me to proceed with that.
I don't think that's necessary, unless anybody wants you to.
No, I was interested, I didn't get the red line. I spotted what I think we discussed here last time, which was a point that I asked for. But if you don't mind maybe highlighting the revisions or the changes, that
Sure.
might suffice.
Yeah, and I'll do the best I can to try to capture those. I don't have
Right.
the red line here either. One of the key changes is to specify that this is a test basis, and it's a test basis for the Category 2 licensee or for PIN. A determination about whether or not we would take this further and apply this to all licensees will depend in large part on what the evaluation of the system would tell us. And there's a strong emphasis, and perhaps not strong enough within this document, but there certainly will be ongoing. Within the document, it's captured on the very last one, number 15, that play management tools will be evaluated to determine the effectiveness and benefit through a project approved by the Commission, and that the specific requirements may change based on the findings of the evaluation. The last sentence in there, I think, is also important. So whether or not we continue this and apply it to all licensees depends in large part on findings of the evaluation. The evaluation may also take us in a different direction. And while these are initial recommendations that should provide guidance of how we would implement this with our Category 2 licensee, that may change as well, depending what the specifics are and what the specific features are may shift and change through the findings of an evaluation process.
So subsequent to that last point, you're going to come back to us with an evaluation plan and a timeline for us to approve?
That's correct, Commissioner. Working on an evaluation plan now, also, and trying to emphasize the importance of evaluation, we would look to build that evaluation plan in as the system itself is also built.
I think that's essential.
Okay. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? What is the status of the discussions with Cambridge Health Alliance?
I believe we have a meeting scheduled next week. I know that there's a meeting that's in the works that to continue the discussion about what should an evaluation component look like.
Okay. Do we need a vote here?
We've
Yes.
already adopted it.
You have previously adopted it, and this is just to ensure that the changes that were made
Right.
match what your requests were.
Okay. All right. Next.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is the placement of ATMs, the location, I'm sorry, of ATMs at a gaming establishment. And this is a bit of an open, not a bit of, it's an open issue with Division on Bankings about whether or not ATMs can be allowed within the gaming establishment. That said, captured within the responsible gaming framework, we anticipated, in anticipation that perhaps they would be allowed within the gaming establishment, we tried to provide some direction on where those ATMs should be located. So within Strategy 5 of the responsible gaming framework, and that strategy is managing high-risk financial transactions, there is a piece 5.3 about bank card transactions, which specifically states that ATM services should not be located within 15 feet of gaming areas. Now, the question is, the rationale that you would not want to have an ATM on the gaming floor is that placing it off of the gaming floor gives an individual an opportunity, a break in the play, and an opportunity to reflect about whether or not they want to continue gambling. Specifically, one of my concerns is individuals who would be chasing their losses. Chasing their losses by going to the ATM, getting more cash to continue to try to win back the money that they have lost. Placing the ATM off of the floor would provide some response to this. What is the science behind 15 feet? Honestly, there really isn't a science behind the distance away from the gaming floor that an ATM would be located. It's the spirit of creating a break in play for the patron.
Just to be absolutely sure that everybody's clear on this, I know we are, but the audience too. At the moment, the Division of Banks has to make a decision, has to make an interpretation of the existing law where there's a disconnect between a pre-existing banking law that says you may not have ATMs in the premises where there is legalized gambling except for the lottery. Then along comes our law, which refers to which makes it clear that it assumes that there would be ATMs within the gaming establishment, but it says that it can't be ATMs that will take money out of EBT cards, et cetera. So our law anticipates that there is an opportunity for ATMs somewhere within the facility. The Division of Banking law says to the contrary. That needs to get interpreted. So until they make their decision, we are merely talking to ourselves about how we will implement it if they give us the right to have ATMs somewhere within the gaming establishment. And we've already made it plain, as Mark is saying, that if it's up to us, we would not have them be anywhere in the gaming area, but at some distance from the gaming area, we would anticipate having ATMs if DOB gives us the right. The commissioner told me the other day that they're very close to making a decision, so it's perfectly appropriate for us to be thinking about how we'll go forward. But I just want to make it absolutely clear that this is not up to us. This is up to Division of Banks. But the second point is all that discussion when Ways and Means Chairman Brewer tried to straighten this out. There was a lot of discussion about ATMs and a lot of conversation about this should be a topic of public conversation. We, of course, have been doing that, but we wanted to take this opportunity to regenerate public conversation about if we are given the right to have ATMs in the gaming establishment somewhere, but not on the gaming floor, how far should the distance be? And Elaine and Michael, we want to request aggressively that we would like feedback from people, whether it's our licensees or just the public at large or whoever. Because we've set 15 feet, but as Director Van der Linden says, that's fairly arbitrary. And some public officials, including, for example, new Senate President Rosenberg, has said that he thought maybe it should be substantially more than 15 feet. So we're looking to invite public comment, and we will then eventually decide if given the right by DOB.
But for the record, you know, we've solicited and received a lot of public comment when we did the responsible gaming framework. It's conceivable that some people may have not noticed every provision in it, but.
Right. Well, and I'm aware of that, but the media was saying
Yes.
there ought to be public discussion. Of course, there's been a lot of public discussion. That's what we've been doing here on this. But because it got this attention, I just wanted to do it again and, invite yet again people's comments. All of our regs go through an elaborate formal and informal public discussion process, but the media missed that in the conversation. Any other issues or questions? All right, I think that does it. Any other business? I don't think so. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.